Okay, well, hello again. Here we are again at the Hats of the 20th Century Museum, Hats and More, and where we left off last time, we were just beginning to talk about the men's hats of 1900. We're starting at the beginning of the century. We're going to work our way all the way through to 2000, 1999. Okay, so what I wanted to say, a couple little mistakes in the last episode. I had said that this was going to be tied behind her head, you know, tied in back. Not really. These bonnets were being tied behind their ears for style sometime, but not tied in the back necessarily. So I wanted to clear that up. Another little thing I wanted to clear up is that I said this was my grandmother's sunbonnet from the 1900 period. It was my great-grandmother's sunbonnet. I don't want to make myself any older than that. Anyway, so we had started with the men's hats, and we had said that all the men's styles had came into being before 1900, and together all the men's styles will pass out of, you know, regular use by 1930, late 30s, early 40s for sure, except for these two, the tweed wool flat cap and the fedora. These two are still with us today. So we'll talk a little bit more about the fedora later. We'll start with the tweed cap. I had told you that this was originated in England, and of course this one is even made in England. And it was taken very seriously by the English because in 1571, Parliament passed a law that all men and boys had to wear a wool flat cap on Sundays. That was to prop up the wool industry, and it did the trick because they're still wearing their flat caps as though the law was in effect, and of course it's not. So by the turn of the century here, we even had, it was always meant to be a casual hat, and by the turn of the century, even women were wearing them for sporting events like golfing and cycling. And because of the large hairdos of the Gibson girl, which we talked about, she came about in 1890 and was the epitome of style for 20 years. Because of that big hairdo, the flat caps women were wearing got to be enormous sizes. Now, I'll never find one, but there was a picture of how ridiculous the gal on the bicycle here. All right, thank you. There we go. So that's how that that came to be. Let's see, what else did we say about oh, by the 1900s, too, they were coming in different fabrics like summer cottons and things like that. So the flat cap is a keeper. Another hat that was popular and came into being, was popular in England, this one is also made in England, was called a deer stalker, but most of us know it as the Sherlock Holmes hat. It's also called the fore and after, which direction is that going? So we often wonder if Sherlock was even able to figure that out. Before and after. Beautiful old tweed, hand-woven Harris tweed from Great Britain. And we talked about that one. What else did we talk about? That might be about as far as we got. Oh, we got started on the top hat. And here we have a beautiful old topper. Let's take this aside for just a second. Beautiful old top hat here. And they had been, they'd been worn in the 1700s. And had evolved from any other tall style. Who knows how exactly. But, I mean, even the Pilgrims wore a tall hat. The Pilgrim's hat was called the pot hat. It's not really a top hat, but you see how it's all a tall hat. And by the 1800s, which these were popular all through the 1800s, and they came in different heights. We all remember the big tall one, the stovepipe, worn by Abe Lincoln. This is kind of a regular size. There's all sorts of flared out tops, things like that. And there was a shorter version called a gambler, or kind of used for people, gamblers on the river boats and equestrian uses. And in fact, here's a shorter version. This hat wasn't old when I bought it, but I thought I really had something. But still, it's not new either. I'm guessing it's probably 50 years old, but there's a short version of that. And they even came in straw varieties. I didn't have Here's a picture of an actor in a straw variety. And even though that was fairly common, it wasn't as widely known as the silk hats that we're used to seeing. So there was even a straw variety. Okay, so at the beginning of let's see. Oh, I should say that in the 1800s, the top hat was popular for everything, for casual use, formal use, and even on the job. As you can imagine and remember, chimney sweeps wore top hats, and groundskeepers would have a top hat as part of their uniform. And but by 1900, there were so many other choices for men that it got pushed into the category of formal. So that's what a top hat was in the 1900s. And this one is called a silk hat because of the shiny plush finish, a silk hat. And they were given out with these little pillows, velvet back pillows that also had the name of the hat maker or the haberdasher on it, given with a hat or just passed out as a handout for advertising. And it would clean and shine the silky finish here. Wonderful idea, this velvet pillow. And we borrowed that idea again in the 20th century when we came up with these velvet lint catchers. It's the very same idea. Velvet catches lint, and it's wonderful. They even used them on record players. When your record was going around, a little velvet pad would clean the record. Now I wanted you to see the address on here. This was a different company. This is Dunlap and Company, and this is MD, I don't know. But anyway, can you see it? The address is opposite the General Post Office in Edinburgh. Isn't that quaint? Opposite the General Post Office. What a wonderful hat. And let's have a look at the case, too. Oh, my goodness. Here's the case I bought it in at an auction. And it would have had a buckle here on the side, so it would have been buckled. You could have carried it by the handle. But, of course, something has to be lost after all these years. So here we are. The inside is meant to fit the shape of the hat. Upside down. Very good way to carry it. Let's put our little pillow in there, too. And then these worn-out elastic straps would have held it down nice and tight. And the lid says that it's North British Railways, Edinburgh. And I'm so glad it made it all the way to where I was able to buy it on an auction. Beautiful old case and top hat. Okay, now this other top hat we have here has a little secret. If you press it to you, it collapses. This is commonly known as an opera hat. But more technically, it's a guibus, named for the man who invented the mechanism in 1837. Many had tried and failed, but Antoine Guibus perfected the mechanism, and therefore it's called a guibus in his honor. This poor old fella is starting to fall apart a little bit on me. Let's see. Apparently, back in the early 1800s, cloakrooms, or they didn't really have cloakrooms in their operas and theaters, so collapsed, a man could put it in the pocket of his frock coat or slide it under the seat. So by the 1900s, we had come up with the idea of cloakrooms and hat check systems, so that this became more of just a novelty. Let's see if we can open it up again. Than a necessity. The guibus, an opera hat, always a favorite. And we'll set that aside. I wished that I had one of these very low, little 3-inch high hat boxes that a guibus goes into. So that will give me something to continue shopping for, because I haven't located one of them yet. There we go. Okay, I'm just going to look at my notes and make sure I said everything I wanted to. Alright, so that brings us to the fedora. Another one of the hats that are still, like the flat cap here, still in use today. And this is one of the oldest I have ever seen. Definitely 1900s or earlier. So, a fedora. I want to start with the right step to say. Okay, we're thinking that a fedora sort of came into being around the 1870s and was worn by men and women, really quite a lot by women at that time. And I've got a postcard here, or not a postcard, but an old card that I found of a lady actually wearing something like a fedora. So how did the fedora get its name? Well, let's see. Let's start with how we think it maybe came into being. Okay, men and women. Yeah. There's a theory out there, and I don't know about all these theories, but one of them was that the fedora sort of morphed from a Tyrolean, a hat from Austria, from the Tyrol region of Austria. And I happened to, whoops, I gotta have a bigger head than that. I happened to run across one of them about that time. So here's a Tyrolean. And it is said that the fedora came along, both felt, and the pointy top got pushed down in, and maybe the brim got rolled down more in front. So that's one theory. Otherwise, I don't know how a fedora came to be. But I do know that a fedora, oh, they also had this big bottle brush at the side. And an interesting part of a fedora is that it has a little wisp of a feather at the side, which is kind of a remembrance of the big bottle brush. We'll talk about remembrances later. Okay. How did it get its name? All right. In the early 1800s, it says, no, 1880s, there was a play called Fedora, starring Sarah Bernhardt as Princess Fedora. And she wore the style that ladies were wearing throughout the play, or at least enough during the play, that by the end of that play, this style hat was called a fedora. And in England, a very similar shaped hat was getting the name Trilby from a play over there about Trilby O'Farrell, who fell under the spell of Svengali, the evil musician. So a hat that is shaped primarily like this, different widths, brims at different times, a Trilby in England, and a fedora here. Okay. Now, a fedora ends up having all kinds of shapes and brim sizes. They're very wide in the 40s, very narrow in the 60s, but we're all familiar with what a fedora looks like. We probably had a grandpa that wore one, or a very stylish young grandson who wears one now. Okay, so now we'll talk about a bowler. Okay, and this is a beautiful bowler. It's a gorgeous lining, kind of an iridescent print in it. I just want you to get the iridescent. We don't know if we're going to get it red or not. I think it's a linwood. And I can't really even make out from where it's from. Okay, bowlers were used a lot in 1900, but they had really kind of come about in 1850s when a wealthy English landowner wanted something more serviceable for his groundskeepers than the usual top hat shape. He wanted something lower, and he wanted something rounded to deflect branches as they were riding by. He wanted it sturdy, too. Sturdy enough to stand on, which I think was probably a myth, but the Bowler Brothers Hat Company were able to meet the challenge, and their company got the contract. Therefore, they're called bowlers. And when they were first introduced, they were called riding bowlers. And I've made this ribbon and button to try to show you how a riding bowler came with a riding guard, which was a ribbon that wrapped around the bowler and tucked in. And they could unwrap the ribbon and put the button into the lapel buttonhole of their jacket. So no longer would a low branch send a rider back to fetch his hat. It was a very good idea. So, now if we're going to keep these at 15 minutes, the clock on the wall said we're at 15 minutes. So we'll start up with the rest of the Boer story in the next show. Thank you very much.